That cyber attack story hitting that key U.S. pipeline. Obviously an example of how vulnerable our key infrastructure in society is to these kinds of ransomware cyber attacks. Let's bring in Padraic O'Reilly, co-founder and chief product officer at CyberSaint Security. Padraic, thanks for joining us. And I want to start there because we've heard about the threats that ransomware, that cyber attacks can pose to our infrastructure. It doesn't happen all that often, but it happened this time. What does that tell you about the situation? It was a long overdue?
In some respects, yeah. This is, in cybersecurity, this is talked about frequently. The vulnerabilities are longstanding, and ransomware groups have really upped their efforts and developed quite a few new tricks in the last 5 years. So this was, I hate to say it was expected, but to some degree it was. It's terrible nonetheless.
Yeah, when I hear about an event like this, you think terrible that it happened, but as you said, with all the warnings for so long, sometimes you wonder why it doesn't happen more often. Why is that? Are we pretty good about protecting these installations and they just get a little ahead of us at times?
I would say we are pretty good. I would say in general, and I work with energy industry and oil and gas, there's some of the best security teams out there. So in general, yes. There's too much variance, perhaps, in the maturity across the sector. Some are really out front doing a terrific job. Others maybe lag a little bit. And there needs to be more support. And I was really heartened to see the administration come out today and talk about the support they're offering to the energy, oil and gas industries as well. There's has to be public-private coordination on this. It's too important otherwise.
How can the governments do a better job of that? You think of the resources that the U.S. government has to bring to bear on an issue like that. What would you like to see them do?
I would like to see a little tooth behind regulation. I know what they're looking at right now is reviewing and doing forensics on each of these individual cases. But, the shadow of 2012, the Cybersecurity Act, hangs long over this. That was to secure our national infrastructure. And given that 85% of our infrastructure is in private hands, and that the cybersecurity industry has a lot of great tools, the government's really the heavyweight in terms of policy and regulation. You need much more coordination between the two sides, and I think that's the way to solve it going forward.
The FBI seems to be putting this on a group called DarkSide, and you get these postings on the dark web that are apparently from this group that almost reads to me like, oops, we didn't mean to cause this much trouble. I mean, could they really be, if they are the people behind this, sincere in that kind of statement when you shut down a major U.S. oil pipeline?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd read much into what a hacking organization says about their efforts. They're notoriously puckish and hard to. They like to be inscrutable. So I wouldn't take them at their word. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I think I trust that instinct as well, because I found that statement to be very, very strange, perhaps disingenuous. It was meant to be an act of contrition. Apparently, FireEye has been bought in to help with Colonial on this issue. At this stage, as they try to get things back online, what precisely are they working on, do you think?
I think what they're working on is how you, in a segmented way, bring the pipeline back online safely. It's murky still, and there's not a lot of great information about where the IT systems are touching the OT systems. But I think what they're trying to do is be very careful that there's no hop attack vectors over, to use a little cyber language. In other words, that the pipeline is safe and not infected in any way.
All right, so that would seem to suggest a certain amount of sophistication on the part of the hackers. I wanted to ask you about that too. How sophisticated to get into infrastructure like this would the attack be? Because often in the past we've heard about breaches. I think thinking more in the retail space, where it ends up being an employee just opening an email or clicking on something they shouldn't have. It just seems when I watch the high espionage movies, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, you have the port of entry, so to speak, right? Clicking a link, but the tools themselves that have been designed by these groups are pretty sophisticated. I wouldn't downplay the sophistication of some of these, because ransomware, you just look at it, it's proliferating, and it's some of the ransoms have gone up into the tens of millions now. They're very powerful tools. You can see, Scripps Health out on the West Coast, the DC police. Baltimore's been locked down a couple of times. They're the tools themselves are pretty complicated, but sometimes the event that kicks it off seems almost innocent. Clicking a link.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, you can put the two together, right? The sort of preying on human nature, which goes, the con long before we had all this technology in place. Is that part of it too, right? When we talk about the threat, how banking is run these days, energy infrastructure, power systems, it's also heavily tech dependent. It seems to leave us very vulnerable.
It does. And, there are a lot of good solutions out there in the private sector. The government has done wonderful research into how to secure our infrastructure. The cybersecurity framework is a real wonder in fostering communication among groups. But more needs to be done. More investment, more coordination, more information sharing. Informational asymmetries are just killing the industry. There's no way to do honest risk analysis without good information, and every leading data set in cyber has a disclaimer on it. We've been working on this for a generation, but it's still not there. That has to end.
When we talk about groups like this, and it's said that they have clients in some instances, they're not doing this on their own. President Biden seemed to be suggesting, maybe even outright, that there's a political basis to that. How much does that complicate matters, too, when you're talking about nation states perhaps trying to make each other vulnerable?
Well, it makes it quite complicated, and we won't know for some time the true dynamics of this. It's early days, and forensics are complicated. I hope this isn't a nation-state event. I hope this is, will serve as a warning and a wake-up call for all of us in cyber and just in the culture more generally around what we have to do to secure our nation's infrastructure. You don't want this thing politically escalating, basically.